We're here today to talk about the basics of county and municipal budgeting. I will point out a couple of things before we get started. The dates of the slide are 2025. So if you're watching this and it's past 2025, if there's a reference in here to a statute, you just need to make sure that that statute hadn't changed. Down at the bottom of the statutes, it'll tell you the last year it changed, so you'd be able to tell pretty quickly if something in that statute has changed. Not so easy to see what has changed, but at least you know it has changed. The last slide in this presentation has an 800 number. That's the Office of Technical Assistance in the State Auditor's Office. If you have a question, because this is going to be a $30,000 view of budgeting, but if you have a question, please feel free to use that number. That's what we're there for. We have a whole group of CPAs and attorneys there to help answer questions. That getting said, we'll just get started, go over some general basics as to kind of why we budget in Mississippi and why it's the way it is. So first off, statutes require 1911-5, 2135-3 requires fiscal years for state, for municipalities and counties to go October 1 through September 30th. That's different from school districts and the actual state itself. So, but that's what's required. There are some special charter municipalities that have different year ends because when this statute got put into effect, they didn't make them change their special charters, but that's very limited number. So if yours is not that way, don't be concerned, it's okay. Around budgeting with the set year ends, the law requires you to base your operations on a budget. So your operations have to be based on a budget. That's going to be a cash basis. You're supposed to tax your citizens for services you provide today, not for services you're going to provide in the future. So it's a cash basis budget. That means cash in, cash out in a simple form. We'll get into that a little bit deeper later on. It requires a specific process to follow in Mississippi. It affects everybody in Mississippi. It's going to affect your citizens based on the services you provide them, but not only the services you're providing them, but the taxes they got to pay. The fees they got to pay for garbage pickup, the fees they got to pay for water, the taxes that they got to pay to provide the general services. So it's going to affect everybody. Nobody's really excited about paying taxes or paying any of these fees. So budgeting process is really important to show that you getting the resources, taking it from somebody basically, but you're providing them something in return and you're good stewards of their money. So that's what the budget's kind of showing. The budget laws in Mississippi don't really change that much because it's kind of the basis of the accounting systems that they're running the counties and municipalities on. So, like I said earlier, you probably don't have to worry about much of it changing. It could be something to do with some of the notices you have to give for hearings, but we'll get into that a little bit later on. So, just the basis of most accounting does come from the budget process. The purpose is an accounting document, a management document, and a decision document. The accounting department follows it to account for what comes in, what goes out, and control the amount of expenditures you got. Management document, the board's going to look at the management to see, okay, who we're going to give the money, what departments we're going to give the money to spend. And then decision making at the department level. If I have X dollars to spend on my police department or my sheriff's department, how am I going to spend that money? Do I need cars, more weapons, more equipment? What do I need? Roads and bridges? Do I need more roads, road equipment, things like that? And then communications document. It communicates to the general public, this is how you spent my money that you taxed me on or you charged me a fee for, or even to the next level, grantors and legislators. When you're asking for some federal money through a grant, or if you're asking for the legislatures for some assistance with a project that you have. Them looking at your budget, looking at your financial statements, basically tells them, hey, they're keeping track. If I give them money, they're keeping track of it. They know how that got spent. They know it's getting spent wisely. So the purpose of the budget is a lot more than just the debits and the credits. It's for the public, the boards, the departments, employees, and the general public and legislatures and grantors. The nature of the budget in Mississippi is a balanced budget. A balanced budget means that you have cash and investments plus revenues minus expenditures equals ending cash and investments. Balanced means none of those numbers can be negative. That means that I'm not overspending. State law does not allow you to overspend what you don't have. So you follow the budget that you've agreed to, and as long as you stay within that budget and that budget was balanced, you're not going to overspend the money that you have or the assets that you plan on bringing in. Now, you do have a beginning cash and an ending cash that you need to be well aware of. So be sure to make your boards aware of, especially with municipalities, because you'll be getting a new board this year. Election year in 2025, starting July 1, you'll be getting a new board. They're going to go in there and see all this money you got left when you're rolling to the end of the year. A lot of people aren't used to seeing that, so they might want to spend that money. You got to tell them, we can't spend that money. We've budgeted this money. We have a balanced budget. We got to have enough money left in October, November, and December to make it through the lean months, because most of your money is going to come from property taxes that are going to roll in December and January, especially counties. Most of their money comes from that. So you'll have a lot of money at the beginning of the year. You got to keep your boards aware of. You got to follow the budget. You can't spend it all because we got to make it the whole year. We can't. You're not like a widget factory. You can make more widgets and sell more widgets. Once you set those taxes and you collect them, that's all the money you get for the most part. It's a good way to look at it. Inside the budget, it's a balanced budget, but at the budget detail, at a minimum, and we set this minimum, at a minimum, your final adopted budget has to be by fund, by revenue type, by expenditure at the department level for the purpose. What that means is you got to have it by fund. Your revenue type's got to be tax, fee, a fine, a grant or loan, and then that's your revenue side. Your expenditure side is the department level. Police department, public works department, by the purpose, personnel services, supplies, contractual services, capital outlay, debt service. That's what we mean. That's the minimum level. You can adopt more. You can adopt a line item budget, but liability kicks in for exceeding the budget you adopt. So that's why we say you adopt it at the purpose level, at the fund department purpose level, so you don't have to keep amending the budget if you're going to go over. If you do it line by line, it gets pretty cumbersome. You can watch it line by line, but it gets pretty cumbersome on how you can keep track of it and if you have to make an amendment. So we'll just jump on to the next slide, which is going to bring us to the next two slides are really, really important. If you look at the next two slides together, it is the budget calendar. When you look at the budget calendar, you have certain statutory requirements you have to follow to pass a budget. So you need to come to the dates you gotta have the budget adopted by and back up in the calendar and allow for some delays, because you're gonna go to the board meetings. Everybody's gonna be competing for the limited amount of resources you got. So you never know, it's never gonna go planned perfectly. So allow some delays in there. But we'll go ahead and jump into the budget process or the budget calendar. So in May, the board should start adopting budget policies. And what we mean by budget policies are, hey, is the revenue expected to be the same? Are you expected to get any new revenues that are coming in? Any new grants? Any new loans? Are you going to issue a bond issue? Do you expect anything to happen on the revenue side? Along with that, Do you expect any new cost? One recent past was COVID. There were a lot of new costs that came about during COVID, caused a lot of probably budget amendments. And then for the next several years, you had additional income coming in and additional costs. So is there anything new that you know about? Is there anything that you budgeted for in the previous year that did not happen, but you're going to have money left over for that you need to rebudget? Because just because you budgeted it in the prior year doesn't mean it's budgeted to spend this year. Also during May, you should find a budget officer. It's usually going to be your financial person in your office. This person is going to have to give you some financial forecast to show, hey, what's the cash flows looking like? So you don't just get 12 months of revenue divided evenly. So you need to see when the revenues are coming in. That budget officer should be in charge of this budget calendar that keeps you on track, that says, hey, we got to get X, Y, Z done by this date or we're not going to make it. I can't tell you how many times we get phone calls at the last minute saying, hey, we're not going to pass a budget tonight because we disagree. And I'm like, you got to pass a budget tonight. There's no going past this date. So that should start happening in May. In June and July, you should inform your department heads of, hey, this is the policy. This is what we anticipate is going to happen. These are your budget request forms, your wish list. Could you fill those out and tell us, hey, what you want and what you don't want? Just let us know. Give us your wish list. When they get done with their wish list, end of July, early in August, then you ought to develop some kind of budget. You either give them what they want or you say, well, you know, police department, you had this last year, we're going to give this money to Public Works because they need some new equipment as well. Or Sheriff's Department, you know, we're going to give you from this year from some money that we had set aside for this different department. So everybody's not going to get what they want. Everybody's competing for the same limited amount of resources. So you got to develop a budget in August. Then we get into where you really need to start thinking about when you start this process, you need to finish this process. Because in August, you need to advertise your public hearing on the budget and the tax levy. That's got to be done for 2 weeks. We'll get in a little more detail on that in the next couple of slides. But you've got to advertise your public hearing starting in August. Sometime in August, you need to have that public hearing to adopt a tax levy. In that public hearing, counties and municipalities have to adopt a tax levy or start the process over again, which means it throws it back 2 weeks. So when you have this meeting, you need to be pretty much set on the kind of revenue that you want. Setting your levy is your revenue. You can set your budget at that hearing, or you can just discuss your budget. Municipalities are required to adopt a budget 1 week after the public hearing. That's just municipalities. That does not have to be in a public hearing setting, but it is going to have to be an open meeting because you are taking a vote. So keep that in mind. For a municipality, that adds 1 more week in the process. September 1st through the 15th. September 15th, the last day to adopt a budget. So you have to adopt a budget by September 15th. And sometime between that time, you got to publish your tax levy. People are like, well, we have till September 30th, and you don't, because all your tax collectors have got to set the levies in for when you go buy a tag October 1, they're collecting the right amount of money, because car tags are based on ad valorem taxes. So this affects the amount of money you get come October 1. So by September the 15th, that's why you need to make all your boards well aware 2 weeks out from September 15th, we have to have a budget by then, and we have to have a public hearing, and we got to advertise for 2 weeks. The last day, September 30th, is the last day to publish a budget. Counties have to publish a budget in some newspaper in the county, and that's getting harder and harder to do because there are fewer and fewer newspapers. Municipalities, if you're under 1,500 in population, you can post it in 3 public places and not put it in the newspaper. Then September 30th is the last day counties can amend the budget you're currently operating under now. And October 30th is the last day a municipality can amend the current budget they're operating under now. We'll talk about budget amendments when we get to the end, but those are the last days you can amend the budget you're currently under. Other than specifics we'll talk about in one of the slides a little later on, you can amend the budget at any time. And the last part I put in here is not really part of the budget calendar, but it is. But it's at monthly board meetings. You need to review your budget and what's actually happening. You need a year-to-date expenditures where you stand in the budget, so you know if you approve all those claims in the claims docket, you're not going over your budget. You have the money to spend it. There's other things that you can request in that monthly board meeting, maybe cash balances to make sure we're not overdrawing the account when we approve all those claims. But at a minimum, you got to have your budget to actual. This is what's actually happened. This is what we budgeted to happen. We're either on budget or we're behind budget. And that's kind of when the cash flows comes into effect. Because in October, November, and December, your revenues aren't going to reflect 1/4 of the revenues rolling in, because your revenues are really going to start rolling in more in January and February when real estate taxes are due. So you got to know that with your budget forecast that, no, we're really not off track yet, because this budget forecast says we weren't expecting that till this day and time. That grant we were going to get in February hadn't hit, so all your revenues aren't going to come in, so you need to keep that in mind when you're looking at this budget reports or year-to-date to actual. Now we'll talk a little bit more about the budget and the hearing, budget versus tax levy hearing. There are 2 statutes. Municipal Statute 2135-5 says you have to hold a public hearing 1 week prior to the adoption of the budget, have advance notice, and you need to adopt a budget 1 week after. The budget, this has to be posted or published in a newspaper. It can be posted in the newspaper if your population is under 1,500. The next statute, 2739-203, used to be, I would call it a county statute. Well, it's not just counties anymore. They changed the word county to taxing entity. Municipalities are taxing entities. So you follow this statute as well. And it requires advertising using specific language in the statute. And it requires advertising unless a municipality is less than 2,000 in population and they're not increasing their tax levy. Then they can post it in 3 public places like they used to could. So this really brought a lot more municipalities in to having to post their budget. So keep that in mind. To get in a little more detail, advertising the budget, like I said, 2135-5 requires a public hearing. It's 1 public hearing 1 week prior to the adoption of the budget. Must be an advance notice of the meeting. It's got to be held outside the normal working hours, and it does not require specific language. That is for municipalities only, municipal governing authorities. They also have to follow the next one, which is 2739-203, because it's all taxing entities, and you have to have a public hearing to consider the proposed budget and tax levy. It sets forth how this advertisement's got to be, if you can post, and you have to adopt a levy on that date, the date of that hearing. That next bullet point, like I said, if you're under 2,000 in population for a municipality and you're not increasing your tax levy, you can post a notice of the public hearing in 3 public places. Everybody else has to advertise. It sounds easy, but here are the advertising requirements. It's specific language, and I didn't put them all in these slides. This is something that might change. This is the most recent changes that have happened, but it is the statute in the previous slide, 2739-203, details what the advertisement got to be. The advertisement must be no less than 1/4 of a page, 18-point font. It's got to have a 1/4 black border around it. It can't be placed in a newspaper where the legal ads or classified ads appear. The legislative intent was for the advertisement to appear in a newspaper that is published at least 5 days a week, if there is a newspaper published 5 days a week. And the advertisement has to run once a week for 2 weeks. That's 2 weeks. That means you got it once a week for 2 weeks. You can't run it Monday and Friday. You can run it Friday and Monday. But it's got to be 2 separate weeks. The hearing has to be 7 days after the first advertisement, and you must adopt a levy in that public hearing or start the whole process over again. So that's where you need to tell these boards, when we get to this hearing, you really need to know what's going on. This isn't a hearing to argue about the budget anymore, or discuss the budget. This hearing is when the rubber hits the road. You got to adopt a levy at this hearing. Counties can adopt a budget at this hearing, but municipalities have to wait a week and adopt a budget a week later after this public hearing. So that's all adding days to back up in the calendar. That's why you need to start right now with this budget. Changing the budget, I said when we get here and we talk about the changes in the budget, you can change a budget or amend a budget, however you want to say it, anytime. If you change a budget by more than 10% of your adopted budget, that's that minimum level by revenue type, by purpose, at the department level. If you change any of those adopted, what you advertised, by more than 10%, you have to re-advertise that budget. You have to republish that budget. Not the whole budget, but just what changed by 10%. And you have to say, hey, this is why we had to change it, and this is the vote that was taken to change the budget. That's got to be in the advertisement. It doesn't have to be the whole budget, but you got to have it if it changed it more than 10%. And that's cumulative. So if you change it 3% one day, one month, then you change it 4% the next month, you're still okay. You don't have to re-advertise. But if you come back the next month and change it 5, all that equals 10 or higher, you got to publish the changes and why you had to make the change. Municipalities are limited. This year, they're limited. You can only amend the budget one time during the first 3 months of office, which is going to be this July, August, and September, because that's when the new boards take effect. Even if it's the same board, they are a new board. They can't amend the budget but one time in the first 3 months of a term, and that is only if the revenues are not materializing. So if you got a board, even if they're not getting run against, even if it's going to be the same people, you need to tell them in June they need to be pretty tight. They need to make sure they don't think they need to make any budget amendments. You are required in July to amend the budget. This is for both in any other year when your revenues aren't materializing. Because what you need to remember, and this is what you need to stress to the board, you have given your department heads an allowance. You give the sheriff, we've given you $10 million. You can obligate $10 million. So if you don't ever tell him, I'm not really getting that $10 million, he still might be out there obligating that $10 million. So if you have to amend the budget, if your revenues aren't coming in, you need to amend the revenue side and the expenditure side and make sure those department heads that you've told how much money they have to spend, no, I can't spend this anymore because it's not going to come in. We didn't get that grant, that bond issue, the referendum failed. For whatever reason, I'm not getting the money I thought I was getting, so you don't have the money to spend. Let them know they don't have the money to spend, because they're not in trouble for obligating money you told them that they had, but you're going to be in trouble for writing that check and exceeding the budget. So make sure they're informed of when you make an amendment. This is some additional information, Mississippi Code sections. If you go here, this is where you can find the code section. At the bottom of each code section that you look up, it'll have the last time it got amended. So this was in 2025. So if it says 2026 was the last time it got amended, then call that number at the bottom and say, hey, I'm looking at my budget. What got amended in this code section so I make sure I'm doing everything the right way. You could call that 800 number. We're there to answer any questions about statutes, regulations, or whatever. We're here to help. So call us if you need us. Thank y'all.